Hello everybody and welcome back to this week's episode of Green Room. I am Bert with Bert's Prop Shop. You can find me on Instagram and Etsy at Bert's Prop Shop. And in this video, I'm going to show you the process of making a helmet out of EVA foam, or also known as foam smithing. And today we're making a Spartan helmet. So we're going to go ahead and get into it, and keep in mind this video is time-lapse, so this was a 4-hour build condensed down to 18 minutes. So let's get into it, but before we do, I think it's fitting. This is Green Room! Alrighty, and now our first process is to take our pattern and trace it out onto the EVA foam. Like you see here in the video, I have everything pinned down, and we're just taking time to trace it all out, and then we'll go ahead and cut it out here in the next section. Alrighty, now that we have it all traced out, we're going to go ahead and cut it. And make sure when you're cutting your pieces out, you always want to cut on the inside of the line, not the outside. So we're going to go ahead and cut these out. And it's important to have a sharp blade because EVA foam does dull the knife. And you want it to kind of just slice like butter through that foam. You don't want to have a little bit of struggle because you might have some rips or tears in the foam and it's harder to glue it together later. So you want to cut on the inside. And you see we have some darts here. When we glue it together, those darts actually form a dome, and that's why we have some darts there. So make sure you cut everything out, and then make sure you always have a sharp knife, otherwise it's going to be harder to cut through these pieces. Alrighty, now that we're done with that section, we're going to move on to the next one, which is called heat forming. And you want to seal up the foam. That's what you see me doing here. And that is not a hairdryer, that is a heat gun. You want to seal your foam. As when you're watching the video, you can tell that the texture is getting more smooth. And you want to roll your pieces. This makes it easier when you go to glue it together for all the pieces to go together. It's much easier to manipulate the shape when you use the heat form technique, and this is a must. You can go without it, but I don't recommend it. And why we heat seal is also it's easier to apply paint later on after we coat it with Plasti Dip. But this is the heat forming technique, and you need to do this to every single piece that you cut out, and it makes it easier to paint later on, and also it makes it easier to form your pieces and give it that curl. And now that it's done and heat formed, we're going to go ahead and line up our pieces, and we're going to be using the registration marks. That's why you see all those little Sharpie marks. And we're going to be using Barge Contact Cement Glue. This is the best in the cosplay armor building world to use. I highly recommend this glue. You might have to get it online as it's not something commonly found in stores, but it is worth it. And it does take 5 minutes for it to dry before applying. So go ahead and coat every single piece that needs glue, and then wait about 5 minutes before applying, and then we'll go ahead and get into that section here in a minute. Okay, so through the power of time lapse, we're going to go ahead and start piecing all these pieces together. And with contact cement glue, go slow with it. As you can see, you're kind of taking our time to line up those registration marks. And with foam, you can stretch it a little bit, and that helps line up those marks. But it's important to line up those marks. And you'll see me miss a couple marks on here, which is okay. If you get the vast majority of them, there might be a couple you can't line up, but that's okay as long as you can get there on it. And make it line up with each other. And here is the darts I was telling you about earlier. So as you can see, as we piece these together, we're starting to form a dome, and that's the dome part of the helmet. And you want to get these lined up as flush as you can, because you don't want to have a harsh seam line, which this helmet did end up having some bad seam lines in the end, which you'll see at the end result, but not too bad for a first-time helmet. So when I first got into EVA foam, I had very bad harsh lines, seam lines. So if you're starting off and you have bad seam lines, that's okay. You're supposed to, because that just means the next time you go to build, you'll know what to fix and you'll come out perfect. Okay, now that it's all, for the most part, put together, you'll see me here. I'm taking little thin strips of foam, probably 4 millimeters, and I'm actually giving it detail by adding this three-dimensional shape to the outside of the helmet. And also, it's a way of hiding your mistakes with those seam lines. And so you can do this as well. It's totally up to you if you're making your helmets. Now, if it's just for you, you can totally go, let your imagination run wild. But if you're doing it for a show or a cosplay or something that's you've been hired to do, you probably would want to check with the person or the director and see if they want you to do that. And now we're going to go ahead and take our Dremel tool, which is that's a lifesaver when you're in the foam biz. This helps sand down those seam lines and get your detail, and that's what you see me doing here. I'm trying to knock down some of the foam in certain spots if I have fuzzies or little pieces because my knife was not sharpened because the foam eats it up. So that's what we're doing here. And now we're getting into more detailed work. You can use a wood burner on foam to burn in detail, which is one of my favorite things to do. But you must wear a mask because these fumes you don't want to breathe in, and it's very toxic. So you make sure you want to wear a mask. Primarily, you want to use a respirator, but I couldn't find mine. So I wore a regular mask. So please make sure you have a respirator when doing this. But this technique really does help bring the helmet alive by adding this type of detail, which is fantastic, especially for foam helmet builds. Now that everything is detailed and ready to go, we're going to go ahead and get this ready for paint. So what we're going to need to do is we're going to need to coat 2 layers of Plasti Dip, and that will allow you to apply paint to it so the foam doesn't, absorb the foam. And these are all the paints that I use for this build, except for the shoe polish. It's actually for the next helmet that I did, but that's okay. So I did a combination of just regular painting and dry brushing. Halfway through painting this, I decided to switch to dry brush. It just came across a little bit better at the end result, but that's okay. When you're in the painting process, it's really kind of up to you what you're going for. I tend to stick with dry brushing, and at the beginning of this video when I was painting I didn't, but it's totally up to you. I do recommend dry brush, especially with foam. It's really cool and unique, the texture it leaves when you're done painting. So you go ahead and continue this process all the way to the end. I use a combination of spray paints and acrylic paint, primarily spray paint because I like to dry brush with that. Some folks don't, but I do. I recommend it. Alrighty, and that is a wrap on this build. I hope y'all learned something new today, and this inspires you to want to go out and try foam smithing. And you can find more tutorials coming soon, hopefully here in the near future.